So today, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner said in an interview that there's a little bit of progress, but yes, the White House would, quote, absolutely go over the fiscal cliff if Republicans would not raise tax rates. Now, Republicans are pointing back to July 2011 and this statement by President Obama.
What we said was give us $1.2 trillion in additional revenues. Which could be accomplished without hiking tax rates, but could simply be accomplished by eliminating loopholes, eliminating some deductions, and engaging in a tax reform process that could have lowered rates generally while broadening the base.
Now, the White House is saying that's out of context, but not specifically how out of context. Let's bring in our panel. Steve Hayes, senior writer for the Weekly Standard. Kirsten Powers, columnist for the Daily Beast, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Okay, Charles.
Look, I love the way the president says what we need is a conceptual breakthrough, meaning Republicans have to accept a hike in rates. What he means is a political surrender, because there is no economic reason why you cannot raise the money he wants raised by doing it through eliminating deductions, exclusions, and credits. Number one, as we saw, he himself said so a year and a half ago. Secondly, the same debt reduction commission he appointed, and then of course ignored, spoke about raising much more through eliminating deductions and loopholes and credits, broadening the base, and at the same time lowering the rates. That's the economic ideal. Everybody understands it's what happened in '86 in the tax reform. It's what was recommended in the Debt Reduction Commission. In their three scenarios, in one of them, they would eliminate so many deductions that they would lower the upper rates to 23% and still come out revenue neutral. So, of course, it can be done. The breakthrough that the president is talking about is to break the Republicans, to create a civil war in the House by insisting that they go back on the idea of not raising rates, which is economically a correct idea. It encourages economic growth if you lower rates, or at least you keep them the same. This is all about politics, nothing about economics.
This is a different President Obama than in the debt ceiling negotiations last time around. They are clearly signaling that they have the stronger hand, and they are not... it doesn't even seem, Kirsten, like they're getting to a room.
Yeah, well, they do feel like they have the stronger hand because he won re-election, and every poll shows that most Americans are fine with the tax rates going up on people making more than $250,000. So they feel like they have that on their side. What they also have on their side is that the president, you can't forget, did give in on this issue twice. And so, and the last time he gave in on it, he said never again. So that's what's hanging over him, is that he has his base looking at him saying, you gave in on this 2 times. It's now time to live up to your word. And so he is kind of boxed in a way politically as well, that he has to give this. I agree with Charles that substantively you can get the money a different way. I just don't think they're going to compromise on that.
But is the base just looking for the scalp of the rates instead of the money? They want the scalp of the rates.
Absolutely. There's no question. There's no question. I mean, because you can make it up. I mean, the president has said it himself. You can make it up another way, and it has now gotten to the point that they want that. And by the way, they also don't want him to touch entitlements. They don't want any spending cuts whatsoever. So, I mean, that's a position he's in, and he's going to have to at some point push back on something. But I think that right now he's not going to give in on the rates, except he might give in on the percentages.
Well, at some point for the state of the U.S. economy down the road, you're going to have to deal with entitlements at some point.
Right.
Fiscal cliff, beyond the fiscal cliff. Let me get to this, Steve. This is about including the debt ceiling and what the president said about that in this negotiation today.
We are not going to play that game next year. If Congress in any way suggests that they're going to tie negotiations to debt ceiling votes and take us to the brink of default once again as part of a budget negotiation, which, by the way, we have never done in our history until we did it last year, I will not play that game, because we've got to break that habit before it starts.
What about that?
Well, would that the president had as many red lines for Iran as he does for House Republicans. I think what Kirsten said is absolutely remarkable. I mean, it is about the scalp. It's about the president having made a campaign argument for the better part of 2012 so that he could run, in effect, a class warfare campaign, and now having to make good on that with the base of his party. Almost, U.S. economy be damned. I do agree with Kirsten that the president has the stronger hand here, and I think we can tell that by what Charles said. The fact that Republicans have offered to give so much, basically offering precisely what Erskine Bowles laid out as the compromise position in the proposal that they made the other day. I mean, you've got Republicans repeatedly going back to the president and saying, here's what we'll do. He says no. Here's what we'll do, going a little bit further. We're in this cycle now where Republicans are at the point where they're done doing that. You talk to Republicans. I spent the better part of the day on the Hill talking to Republicans about exactly the way out of this. And increasingly you're hearing from Republicans on the House and on the Senate side that we are done looking for compromise on this. We now want a way out. We're looking for an exit plan.
Meantime, Charles, the Pentagon is now saying that they are preparing for sequestration, as are other agencies, getting ready for what happens. How much can the government, do you think, hold off some of the bad things that happen after the first of the year?
We can hold off some of it for a few months, but this is a catastrophe. And the president thinks that by beginning to rattle the cage on this and to say now we have to start alerting contractors that jobs will be lost, that somehow that's to his advantage. I think it's exactly the opposite. He's the president. He's commander-in-chief. His own Secretary of Defense has said in public, in testimony, that this would be a hollowing out of the military. It would be catastrophic, and he implied that he would resign if it went into effect, that he couldn't in good conscience administer cuts like this. So you've got a president who's in charge and who's going to do what? Who'll blame it on Republicans? But in fact, it's his military, his administration, and what's his Secretary of Defense going to do? So I think, again, Republicans have to rethink the idea that Obama holds all the cards here. This is a great negative against Obama if we end up with these huge cuts in defense, which are utterly insupportable.
Quickly.
Oh, I think they're bluffing on wanting that they don't care about going over the fiscal cliff. That Geithner comment, it's a complete bluff. They're terrified of going over the fiscal cliff because it will send our economy probably into a tailspin.
I don't think so. I think the president's just fine going over the cliff. And if you look at what he would get both in the changes with the cliff and the ability for him to play hero if the country went over the cliff, then the president can remedy two problems that Democrats have faced for years. He immediately becomes a huge tax cutter, and then he can restore some of these defense cuts and position himself as the pro-defense Democratic president. And while I think the points that you're making are logical and correct, that's not the way that this is playing out in the media right now. And perceptions in this matter as much as anything else, and I think you're looking once again at a media that's eager to blame Republicans for this.
But that's why I'm correcting them.
You're correcting them.
We have